Good morning or
Hi
good afternoon.
hi there. Actually, where I am, it's still morning. So,
Ah, then good morning applies.
yeah, exactly.
Happy recording in progress to all of you.
Not only is there one Emilio de Toro, there's two.
That's the Turner cloning technology. We don't talk about it much in public, but when I've reached the end of this physical body, I just transfer my consciousness to the next one.
It's good that the computational singularity will take over for all of us. So,
Right?
hi, Bailey.
Hi there.
You would think after like 3 years of this, we'd all stop doing the, oh, I guess I'm muted thing. But no,
Second nature at this point.
there's a whole generation of like, currently fourth graders. You're going to be laughing at everybody older than them forever saying like, you're on mute.
I love it. Love the cat memes. Bailey, just as I'm getting sound readings, your sound is a little loud, so I don't know if you want to just tone it down just a tiny bit because of the treble nature of the speaker.
Okay.
Would that be under microphone control?
Yeah, it would be under microphone control. You're at a good level. How do I pronounce your first name again?
I'm Kenan.
Kenan, great. It's what I guessed, but I wanted to be correct.
I have heard it pronounced a number of different ways. So
I hear you. I'm alternately Julio, Mario. I got 2 emails addressed to Greg within the past 6 months. I'm like, Greg.
wow, that's you get a nice insight into how people's mnemonic devices work, huh?
Yeah.
Hi,
How's the
Darian.
volume now?
You guys.
Hey. Could you say that again, Bailey?
The volume all right now?
Sure. Might even be a slight, you might even be able to raise it a tiny bit.
Yeah, I would
Little
turn it up
bit?
a
How
tiny
about
bit.
this? Sounding good?
Even a tiny bit louder.
Oh, alrighty. How about now?
That's
That's
perfect.
excellent.
Beautiful. Thank you. Alrighty.
Do you need any other sound or visual check or anything from us?
Devarian, could you say something
Testing, 1, 2,
insightful, a pithy
3.
aphorism?
Can you hear me now? Is that volume okay? Should I go up?
That's
higher?
great. That's perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good
Hello.
afternoon.
Oh,
Nice to meet you all.
You
You
too.
as
You have
well.
Yeah.
very exciting backdrop there, President.
You think?
I love it.
How many people are you expecting will participate in the session today?
We had over 60 registered.
And then we will also live stream to Facebook where we usually get additional viewers and a lot of shares.
So the forum we did, this is also going to be live streamed on Wisconsin Eye. So this will be broadcast across the state. They'll be piggybacking on our stream. The other day we did a forum and we had, I don't know, 60 in person and 500 people had seen it online just on Facebook by 10 p.m. that night.
Wow.
Now
Is
that's
there a,
up to 1,000.
Is anybody accessing this strictly through audio? If I'm like waving these books around, is it going to be something that people can't see?
Seldom. A couple of random people driving, watching Zoom on their phone while they're navigating Milwaukee traffic.
I will try not to kill them then.
Or maybe you'd be doing us a service. Hi, Chancellor.
Hello there, getting unmuted. How's everybody doing?
Good. Thank you.
Great. Delighted to have this opportunity here today. It looks like a great program. What's our expected or anticipated turnout?
The registers for Zoom.
We presidents ask the same questions. It's
It's
all about market share. It's all about market share.
And how does it affect enrollment?
You'll be able to double your tuition costs after this.
There we
one.
go.
No.
There we go.
We had if I heard Chrissy correctly, a little over 60 registered for the Zoom. The panel we did a couple of days ago had 60 in person, 500 people had seen it on the Facebook alone by 10 p.m. that night. Now that's up to 1,000. And this one is also, as was that one, being simulcasted by Wisconsin Eye across the state. So I have no idea the total metrics, but a lot.
Terrific.
Actually, I just logged back in, and we are 80
registrants
now, so we've gotten 20 more since
since yesterday when I last checked.
That's great.
So those
Well-
of you who are active on Facebook can jump over to the Milwaukee Turner's page and then reshare that Facebook broadcast to your own pages, and that'll exponentially increase the metric. The metrics for we'll use the phrase non-personal pages like the Milwaukee Turners or the university are generally throttled by Meta, and your personal pages aren't subject to the same algorithms. So you'll have a much greater increase on return for every non-organizational account that reshares the Facebook broadcast.
Right. Well, President Daniels and Professor Baldwin, we're really grateful for your accepting this opportunity. It really is something that brings together such a great expertise, and Dr. Ferguson facilitating and moderating this. And of course, our students' role. Bailey, this is going to be terrific to have your perspectives on this.
I'm
Thank
very
you.
excited. Thank you,
Thank you very
Chancellor.
much.
Be great. I'm a huge public university fan. I'm on the board for the Helen Bader School of Social Welfare. I'm on WUWM's board and the advisory board for the Center for 21st Century Studies.
Wonderful. You're covering a lot of UWM there.
I need a UWM paycheck. That's what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah.
I'll warn you, they're very small.
Yeah. He says to the man sitting in front of a Spider-Man pinball machine in Turner Hall. So I'll have a brief introduction in the beginning where I'll just welcome friends, and then I'll turn it over to Kenan, and then you
And
all will do
I'll
this.
introduce Mark.
Yep. And then at the end, I'll just announce some of the upcoming events and close it out.
I know that Turner's is going to run the Q&A, correct? So like you're going to be looking at the questions that come in, and where will those show up for me to read, or did we change the plan on that so somebody else will be reading them?
what's the easiest way to do this, Elena?
Do you want us to share them in the run of show document? If you wanted to give me edit access to that, or
Yeah, I'm because it was C21 coordinating that and I'm moderating, I was never part of the decision-making loop there. So whatever they've set up, I just want to know if I'm looking in my, if where I should be looking for those questions if I'm going to be reading them.
Elena,
Can you hear us?
Elena, I'm not sure if you can hear us, but either way, Kenan, if Chrissy can access the C21 document, that'll be great. You as moderator can also cherry pick the questions. So if you find questions germane to the conversation, not too far afield, you can put them in. We can also send them, since Chrissy is a panelist, just in the Zoom chat. And so that'll be only visible to panelists. And then you can select the ones you feel best fit into the conversation. With a broader panel like this, sometimes you get very specific and odd and nuanced questions, or questions that are Douglas Adams level non sequiturs, and you're going to want to skip those.
Right, right. So just to clarify, is it Elena who will be seeing all the questions rolling in and then passing them on to me, or?
I think it'll be two people. I think Chrissy will receive some questions here. People may be asking questions in the Zoom chat, and you also can see, in the Zoom chat.
So I'll
You
be able
too
to
can
see
see
them
that.
from the chat. Okay.
Exactly. And then if we're getting other questions on Facebook, Chrissy can take the relevant ones off the Facebook, since we will have multiple opportunities for individuals to submit questions via Facebook, since it'll be streamed in a bunch of places. And then those can be popped in the Zoom chat too, and you can just cherry pick them. And also be prepared, maybe everybody is wrapped and doesn't have the chance to type in a question because they're busy taking notes. You can ask other questions.
Sure.
So when we begin in a couple of minutes, I'll hit start webinar and then I'll also I'll turn off my video and I'll hide, sorry.
Let me mute.
Emilio and I are in the same room. Um,
I will hide those of us who are not video participants, who are not panelists, so that the audience can't see us. But you can still reach us in the chat. Just make sure you're hitting send chat to, and then you click on the two. There's a drop down, and you can click hosts and panelists. So that if there's anything technical or anything that you only want to share with those of us who are in this room right now, just make sure that it says hosts and panelists. But if you do want to interact while you're not speaking with the rest of the audience, that feature is on, so the audience can interact with each other and can type their questions freely so that everyone can see them in the chat.
Okay.
And then just to reiterate what Emilio said, if there are questions on Facebook that I think are pertinent, I'll just share them in here for us. I did request edit access to the document, but unfortunately I'm not the owner, so I'm not sure that
And by share them in here, you mean on the chat, or
Yes,
you'll
on the
say
chat.
it, or, okay.
I'll be a silent background helper, so you won't hear from me once we begin.
So will the recording be capturing all the Q&A and the questions as well in a separate type of function that could be seen later?
Yes, yeah, we'll keep a copy of the video and audio from this, which is also streamed to Facebook. So that version of the recording is immediately available, and then we'll keep a copy of the chat and any questions that come through the Facebook chat and the Q&A, and that can be shared.
Thanks.
After I do my introduction and such too, I will mute my video.
Okay.
And my audio. Anybody looking forward to doing something exciting once the warm weather finally nestles in?
We're all in different weathers, so I'm in Vancouver right now, so it's nice
See-
and rainy here.
my condolences.
Bike riding, Emilio. Got to get out on the bike. How about
Me too.
you?
I'm a Vespa guy. I scoot around and drink espresso and say ciao.
All right.
How about you, Devarian or Bailey or President Ron?
Just waiting for it so I can get out.
Yeah, right.
Out and, lounge, whatever, that'd be great.
A little bit of the same, but mostly kayaking on the Milwaukee River. I'm hoping to do
Okay.
a lot more of that this summer.
I'll come visit my mother who lives on the north side on 41st Street.
Oh, do it.
Oh, one more run of show point. I think I had emailed people, for some reason I'd gotten a draft with Devarian's name wrong in it. And so alphabetically, I'll introduce him first, and then President Daniels, and then Ms. Jones. So I had talked to everybody individually saying, oh, you're going to be first or second, and I've got every single person wrong. So
We're all first.
okay, so when it turns 1:30, I will hit start. And
Okay.
then all the participants will come pouring in.
I'll normally stall for a couple of minutes and say, hey, friends, we're going to begin in just a moment or two as the people arrive. In my best airline pilot voice. Welcome, friends. We're going to begin in a moment or two as we allow some time for everybody to join us for this very exciting forum. So just hold on to your laptops for a couple moments. And for those of you just joining us, we are going to begin in just a couple of minutes, allowing some time for other folks to join us and for everyone to get situated. And friends, we are going to begin in exactly 1 minute. We're just allowing a few more folks to arrive. For those of you joining us, this will be streamed on Facebook as well. So we invite you to jump over to the Milwaukee Turners Facebook page, and we invite you to share this forum so that others can see and engage in the conversation. It's also being simulcast across the state by our friends over at Wisconsin Eye. I guess we'll begin. Welcome, everyone. We're very excited that you're able to join us for this special Vel Phillips Forum event with the Milwaukee Turners and our friends from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's Center for 21st Century Studies. I'm Emilio Dottore, Executive Director of the Milwaukee Turners. In just a few moments, we'll be exploring the role and responsibilities universities have supporting our democracy during such tumultuous and divisive times. Please remember that our state election in Wisconsin is April 2nd and the polls close at 8 p.m. So make a plan to vote. Your vote matters. And you can find out who and what is on your ballot at myvote.wi.gov. For those who've just joined us, this is also, in addition to being on Zoom, is being streamed on Facebook. So if you'd like to share this forum with your friends on the Facebook page, we invite you to jump over to the Milwaukee Turners Facebook page and do exactly that. And it's also being streamed live across the state on Wisconsin Eye. With that, we're going to turn it over to Kenan.
Hi, everyone. My name's Kenan Ferguson. I am a professor of political science at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And I want, first of all, to thank the folks hosting and organizing this session. That includes the Milwaukee Turners, who are, I believe, an over 170-year-old organization in Milwaukee dedicated to developing community, health, and citizenship for the citizens of Milwaukee. I'd also like to thank the Center for 21st Century Studies under the directorship of Van Basting and helping us today, Alani and Nelson. Center for 21st Century Studies is one of the preeminent locations for humanities research in not just Wisconsin, but the United States, and is nearing its 60th birthday. First, I would like to also introduce the Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, and that's Mark Monet.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate the importance of this particular topic. What could be more important than what we're going to be talking about today? Trust and the vote. This topic, and particularly the university and its role in democracy, is what I care about. And its grave importance is something that I frequently speak about. At our campus, as most of you know, we absolutely have a duty, a burden, and an honor and responsibility to encourage open, respectful civil dialogue about these complex and intensely emotional issues. We're hugely committed to being an open and welcoming institution that respects everyone's right to free speech. What exactly, though, does this mean in terms of roles and responsibilities of universities in the context of democracy today? We think about representation, we think about the communities that we're in, particularly the divided communities that we find ourselves increasingly in. I not only speak about this, but I uphold all the parts of our university that really strive to create open fora, strive to recognize the convenings, the opportunities that universities, particularly universities, can provide. These times that we're in do afford many opportunities to defend and support our freedom of expression and underscore the importance of civil dialogue. At the same time, these are some of the most difficult issues, as we've seen, whether it's at the Ivy Leagues or at the other extreme of post-secondary education, what we're seeing today in technical colleges, high schools, and all the way around. We see the importance increasingly underscored around social capital, politics, religious differences, individual experiences. So what we try to do, and what this forum today is all about, is the development of critical thinking, of how we create even more opportunities for individuals to understand and to participate, to use their voices to help create, further, support, and uphold our democracy. You're going to see this in action momentarily. Today, we have one of our most impressive students, Bailey Jones. We have the president of one of the most prominent universities, the author of a book that focuses very much on the role of the university in democracy, and a career devoted to this from Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Ron Daniels. And we have a social critic, Dr. DeVarian Baldwin, who has really worked in addressing current trends and critiquing those in administration, particularly in colleges today. Dr. Kinnan is going to be officially introducing them here in a moment. And with that, I thank you all for participating and turn it back over to you, Kinnan Ferguson.
Thanks. In President Daniels' recent book, he mentions on page 235 that George Lanou, a political science professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, published a study showing that most universities rarely sponsor debates or fora about public policy issues that incorporate different perspectives. I'm very pleased that today we are going to do exactly that. We're bringing some very divergent perspectives together to talk about the role, the respective roles that universities play in democracy and that democracy plays in universities. I'm going to introduce each of our participants in alphabetical order by last name. And at that point, after I introduce each one, they're going to give us a few 2 to 5 minutes summarizing what their project is and what their interests are in that. After that, we're going to ask each other some questions and get into a little bit deeper of the implications and meaning of what all three participants have been showing, arguing, and finding. So first is Dr. DeVarian Baldwin. He is an internationally recognized scholar, author, and public advocate. He's the Paul E. Rather Distinguished Professor of American Studies and founding director of the Smart Cities Research Lab at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. His academic and political commitments have focused on global cities, particularly the diverse and marginalized communities that struggle to maintain sustainable lives in urban locales. Baldwin is the award-winning author of several books, most recently In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower: How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities, which you can see probably in a mirror reverse here. He served as the consultant and text author for The World of the Harlem Renaissance, a jigsaw puzzle. His commentaries and opinions have been featured in numerous outlets from NBC News, BBC, and Hulu to USA Today, The Washington Post, and Time Magazine. Baldwin was named a 2022 Freedom Scholar by the Marguerite Casey Foundation for his work.
Hello. So good afternoon, good morning, hopefully good afternoon where everybody is. Just talking a little bit about this issue of the question of democracy, and particularly the role that universities play in that. Just from the top, we have historically understood higher education has historically presumed to serve as a bastion of democracy. When we look at key points of educational access, upper mobility, academic freedom, or we might say more broadly free speech, and even free association. But there are these discontents. We see democracy discontents being manifest in the form of the rising importance of selectivity as dictated by the Moody's credit rating, which has a heavy hand in the rankings and reputation of higher education. Shrinking admissions rates and affordability are shrinking, while both public and private universities come into existence because of a state charter that says they serve the public good of that state, and yet the universities are shrinking in their enrollments for state residents. We also are faced with the dual forces of certification and at the same time facing the de-skilling of labor. And finally, we are facing the expanding regimes on campuses of censure, surveillance, and dismissal, with the case of Palestine, Israel, as being a case that's no greater in our present than what we've had thus far. So what I've seen when I look at the question, the history of democracy's possibilities, but also its discontents, is that we have primarily framed these discussions in an educational discussion, classrooms, laboratories, conversation. But the role that universities and colleges are playing in our lives are actually increasingly non-educational. They're more essentially influencing our political economic spheres. And this is where my work comes in with the book In the Shadow of the Ivy Tower. So while we contain our discussions of democracy in the realm of discussion, debate, free association, admissions, right before our eyes, colleges and universities have become the biggest employers, real estate owners, healthcare providers, and even policing agents in major cities and small towns all across the country. And with such importance, we are witnessing higher education's growing control over the economic development and political governance in America's urban and rural communities, or what I call the rise of universities. So all across America, colleges and universities have become big business, and our cities have become their company towns. But there was a cost for those living in the shadows of these ivory towers. Campus expansions can raise housing costs and displace residents in neighborhoods of color that largely surround campuses. Higher education's broad control over labor can lower wage ceilings and suppress collective bargaining efforts for entire work sectors. And we're not talking about faculty, we're talking about the service areas of cafeteria workers, construction, grounds crew, physician's assistants, people of that, security. Nonprofit university medical centers emphasize profitable boutique services, high-profile research, or prioritize student services to the detriment of the care that they're supposed to provide in exchange for their tax exemptions. And finally, campus police forces surveil and profile some of the same residents. And especially in the name of private universities, those police forces are rarely held to public account. I talked to a person in the state of Maryland, where her jurisdiction is over the Johns Hopkins campus, and she acknowledged or identified that the rise of a private police force in East and West Baltimore was akin to putting a Vatican City in the middle of Baltimore, which means the loss of democracy, the loss of democratic possibility through a private police force that only answers to the president and the board of trustees. So with this in mind, we should have a conversation about democracy and higher education, but it cannot be constrained to simply a discussion of classroom debate, of free association, of enrollment access. It must also bring into conversation the political economic spheres where higher education is holding an increasing role. Democracy must reach these spheres if we're going to have a true and robust conversation about the future of higher education democracy. Thank you.
You're muted, Cannon.
That does happen. Thank you. Pull back up this. All right. I need to open up again the bio because that disappeared. I apologize. So our second participant is Ronald J. Daniels. He has served as the 14th president of Johns Hopkins University since 2009. At Hopkins, he has strengthened interdisciplinary collaboration in research and education, enhanced student access, deepened engagement with the city of Baltimore, and supported economic and social innovation. A law and economics scholar, he is the co-author of 8 books and dozens of scholarly articles on the intersections of law, economics, development, and public policy. His most recent book, What Universities Owe Democracy, takes up the challenges facing democracy and argues for the indispensable role that universities play in sustaining democratic societies at this critical moment in history. He previously served as provost at the University of Pennsylvania and dean and James M. Torrey Professor of Law at the University of Toronto. President Daniels.
Well, thank you all for the opportunity to be here today and really a chance to participate in a collegial fashion on addressing these most important topics of universities and democracy. And really pleased to be able to have co-panelists who bring expertise and perspectives that I look forward to being able to engage during the course of our conversations. And Professor Baldwin in particular, I look forward to having an opportunity to talk about some of the concerns you raised about policing, which I will say I share completely your concerns about the absolutely essential character of having any policing, whether municipal or university-based, be subject to clear, concrete and comprehensive public accountability. And we'll talk to you a bit about, if you'd like, some of the lessons we've learned in terms of the way in which we worked with the legislature to develop a comprehensive scheme to ensure that the exercise of this most important power was subject to the kind of accountabilities that you've indicated are fundamental to ensuring public trust and confidence in the exercise of that power. But that aside, what I want to talk about, to start at least, is the work that I did with 2 co-authors on thinking through the role of universities in democracy more generally. To my mind, universities and democracy are deeply, even inextricably intertwined. Universities need democracy to thrive and flourish. At the same time, our universities are indispensable institutions in their contributions to democratic governance. Yet, as we know, democracy here in the United States and indeed around the world is struggling. In the past decade, the Varieties of Democracy Institute has found that the share of the world population living in democracies has dropped from 52% to 32%. And it's my view, in a moment like this one, it's incumbent upon every institution with a stake in the liberal democratic experiment to step up and vigorously protect it. And this, of course, includes universities. In the book, What Universities Owe Democracy, I argue that universities have the capacity to contribute to liberal democracy in 4 distinct ways. They educate students in the values, history, skills, and aspirations necessary for good democratic citizenship. They advance social mobility by launching students up the socioeconomic ladder. They steward facts and cultivate expertise that can be used to inform the public and policymakers, and as importantly, check the power of government. And they bring people together from vastly different backgrounds and teach them how to engage with one another meaningfully across their differences. But it is true that universities have not always delivered on these promises. Our potential has not always been fulfilled. This not only diminishes our ability to support democracy, but it also erodes public trust. And I think there's steps we can and should make to restore trust and to fulfill our obligation to democratic society. Now, my book outlines a reform agenda that includes several ways for universities to take action tomorrow, if they wanted, in each of these areas. Some universities, including my own, Johns Hopkins, have shown that these reforms can be done and they work. And a few examples, there's many more that are scattered through the book, but let me just highlight a few. First, universities could adopt some requirement for all students who are enrolled in their programs, a democracy requirement that ensures that they're helping to train the future generations of informed and thoughtful democratic citizens. The precise design of this requirement could vary on the particular universities and its needs, but at least here at Hopkins, we've done a lot of work to ensure that more courses about democracy are offered and promoted to our students. We're developing a new minor in civics. We have a yearly orientation to the university, which includes a democracy day, where we are trying as much as possible to give students a clear sense of the extent to which the democratic experiment is one that requires continued renewal of effort on the part of students, young citizens, and ensuring its success. And I think this is a role that universities can play. Secondly, universities can end special admissions preferences for children of alumni, legacy admissions, to make space in their classes for highly talented students of all backgrounds. We did this in Hopkins in 2014, not under compulsion, but on our own because we felt it was the right thing to do. And it has worked, I think, quite effectively of opening up pathways for talented students, no matter their background. Our percentage of legacy students has decreased very significantly, and correspondingly, we now have seen a significant, virtually a doubling of the percentage of Pell-eligible students enrolled in our program. That wouldn't have happened without some contribution having been made by the end of legacy programs. Universities can build platforms to ensure that the research and insights of their faculty are open and transparent to the public to help restore trust in the scientific enterprise and in facts more generally. And this was something that we were involved in firsthand during the pandemic with the COVID-19/Coronavirus Resource Center website that we put up that tracked the spread of the pandemic, but essentially compensated for the failure of public institutions, governmental institutions, to provide data and counsel to citizens in this country and abroad who were desperately anxious to understand the nature of the pandemic. And finally, universities can do simple things like changing their housing policies so that incoming students are assigned roommates rather than simply choosing roommates who are like themselves, to give students the opportunity to encounter people whose experiences and perspectives are different from their own. And they can launch platforms to encourage debate and dialogue across difference. Here, we created a new debate initiative to model civic discourse for all our students. And we just opened up our new center in Washington, D.C., in the heart of the capital, that's bringing our community of scholars and learners together with policymakers and the public to grapple with the most challenging issues of the days. I recognize that universities and public universities like the great University of Wisconsin face many hurdles right now, from financial challenges to governments, legislatures, and communities that are suspicious, if not hostile, to the academic enterprise. And under such extraordinary pressures, it can feel like we're always playing defense, making it difficult to even imagine launching new initiatives to support democracy or to advance the core democratic values we share. Yet I believe sincerely and deeply that this is our obligation and this is what we must do even in this moment. And in fact, the University of Wisconsin has an amazing legacy on these issues. The University of Wisconsin, of course, is home to the Wisconsin Idea, a sprawling effort to bring the work of the university to bear in support of the flourishing of its citizens. In the early days of the 20th century, dozens of professors from the university came to advise the state legislature and design policy with them, leading the country's first viable state income tax and workers' compensation program, instituting new workplace safety standards, and reducing government corruption. This is an amazing legacy, and it emanated from your university. All this to say, the University of Wisconsin was a shining example for how universities could contribute meaningfully to democracy. And I believe now is our moment to draw inspiration from that example and renew and magnify our role in the months and years to come. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel.
Thank you. Our third participant is Bailey Jones. Bailey Jones has been an at-large senator with the Student Association of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee since 2021. She prioritizes student safety and connects students with essential resources. Honored with the Agent of Change and Student Organization of the Year Awards in 2023, she demonstrates a commitment to fostering a caring campus environment. A senior majoring in conservation and environmental science with a minor in Spanish, she advocates for sustainability. In her free time, she enjoys training her golden retriever, Joji. Ms.
Thank
Jones.
you, Ken. Yes, thank you, Ken. And thank you, everyone, for your intros. I'm very excited to be here. So what I've been working on recently is a survey which came about after a conversation with Ann Bastings. This opportunity was kind of reached out to me just through my involvement with student government. And from my conversations with Ann, I just said it'd be great to have more than just my own opinion in this. A lot of students' livelihoods are at stake, and they pay a lot of good money to come to our universities. And so I wanted to include as many folks as I can. The research is still in process. So these are just my preliminary findings, of course, but it's turning out to be quite interesting, I think. Furthermore, I'm from a small town in Wisconsin, in Kenosha County, and I'm a first-generation student. So I have a pretty good perspective into what rural communities are thinking and talking about, and the conversations at my dinner table as well. So I really look forward to sharing some of those things and my own perspective and some more solutions that I think the university can utilize. I heard a lot of great things from the two, Dr. Baldwin, Dr. Daniels. I'm very, don't have a book yet, of course, but and one day, I will have a slew of resources and things like that. But currently, I just have this survey and my own personal experience. But I'm truly honored to be here and share that with you guys.
So to our attendees, I'd like to lay out the structure of what's going to be coming up. We're all, the three of us, well, the four of us are going to talk for a little bit under half an hour, digging into some of the details of the research and arguments that are in these works. And we're going to follow that up with some questions between the speakers and from the audience as well. I do think that most of the questions from speakers to one another will probably come up in the course of our discussion. And so we'll spend a little extra time collecting comments and questions from the audience that we'll be able to read to our attendees to specifically ask them. I'd like to start off the discussion by emphasizing part of what Ms. Jones is focusing on, which is the presumption that I think most people have that a university is there specifically to serve students. It's a student-oriented place, and yet I think we all understand it's not run by students. And so I'd really like to start off with a question about the democratic potential of a institution that in fact is built on certain hierarchies of faculty over students, of administrators making determinations on long-term ideas that students don't have any participation in. That is to each of you, we'll start with Dr. Baldwin. Is the university a good place to look for democracy at all? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Good question. I mean, I think that the university is a place to look for democracy, if only because it holds so much power. It is, again, as I said before, it is the dominant employer, real estate holder, medical provider, policing agent, deliverer of educational knowledge in the post-secondary sphere. It accumulates public dollars in terms of its property tax exemptions. It accumulates dollars in terms of its federal grants that come from the public. And so therefore, just on the political, economic, material side, it is a profound place where democracy should take place, where it should be exercised, where it should be discussed and debated. So I definitely feel like even if we don't see it there, democratic discussions should be there. But bringing directly into your conversation the role of students, historically, it is student activism, whether they are seen as potential, enemies at the gates or as consumers. It is students that have shaped policy throughout the 20th century of higher education, at the very least, but actually could go back to medieval times. And so while students do not have a role in governance, maybe at the symbolic best, maybe there's a student governance, a SGA president representative in the governmental affairs, there could be a question, there could be a statement to be made about what role students should play. in the governing factor of higher education. But one could even argue about what role do faculty actually have? That we see a decreasing significance of shared governance in higher education across the country. Governance is happening, usually people argue because of Title IX and all the technical expert requirements that are placed on higher education, that there's a more specialized and greater need for specialized expertise in the governance apparatus of higher education, which is being taken on by administrators. And so in the faculty realm, shared governance has primarily been relegated to the realm of curriculum, while curriculum is considerably the shrinking component of what higher education is actually doing. So while the curriculum is shrinking, in all these other realms of real estate and public-private partnerships and tech development and investment and policing and security, all these other realms of higher education are growing. Even in the realm of shared governance, that's an increasingly shrinking part of what happens. But at the end of the day, when we look at a school like the New College in Florida, our friends on the political right, they understand that higher education is a profound site of struggle. It's something where power is held. And so when Chris Rufo and Ron DeSantis took control of the New College in Florida, the first thing they said was using medieval language. We are over the walls. They understand that power is held in higher education. Now, for them, it's not just about education, it's about the political economic element of what education does. But the point still holds that while we are ambivalent about what role higher education plays, our friends on the right are very clear about the power it holds. And so we must be vigilant about having discussions, but they cannot just be relegated to the realm of free association, discussion, and debate when higher education holds so much of a greater role in our political economy.
Thank you. President Daniels.
So, I think that it's clear that there is a significant impact of the university felt by a number of different constituencies or estates, and I'm not going to rehearse all the ones that Professor Baldwin just alluded to, but it's clear that we have broad ramifications and there's broad impacts from what we do. And so then the question, of course, is how do you ensure appropriate accountability, fidelity to these various interests that are affected by us? And that then goes to the issue of whether this is a matter for governance within the university, whether there's appropriate mechanisms outside the university to ensure accountability. What is the role of federal, state, often local legislation and regulation, all of which is aimed at ensuring that there's alignment between the activities that we undertake and the interests of these various constituencies. And then, of course, it's a challenge of how when you have competing interests, desires, goals, how do you align them all and do so in a way that ultimately earns confidence, builds legitimacy for the decisions we take? So at least in my case, and thinking about here at Hopkins, I think there are, of course, going to the issue of student voice, there are ways in which we have various advisory committees, roles for students in which we interact with them around specialized, particularized interests that they'll have in the university. Sometimes this past week, in fact, I met with students representing undergraduates, but then had a subsequent meeting where we've recently created a council where we meet with students from across the university, including graduate students and professional students, and try and tease out the common interests that drive their priorities and concerns and find ways to respond to them. These are important conversations and ultimately are a way in which we ensure responsibility, attentiveness to students in the way in which we conduct our activities. But having said that, it seems to me, where you also have really important role for students in interacting with other stakeholders is when you start to set broad aspirations, directions for the university, when you call out strategic priorities, when you think about the kinds of initiatives that you want to do more of, and sometimes when you decide that because of a need to deal with resource scarcity, there's things you need to do less of. Those are really important decisions that in some sense implicate all stakeholders, including, I would say, people who are outside of the university, our neighbors, and who are affected by decisions that we will make. And here, at least for me, what has been important has been to take the opportunity to do serious strategic planning, but to do so in a manner that involves all of the estates of the university. So we spent about a year and a half going through a process, an iterative process to develop plans, priorities for approximately 5-6 year period, in which we held probably about 75 different town halls. We put out draft reports, took input, invited input to shape priorities, and then sought to knit that together in a manner that I think reflects a legitimate and coherent vision for what the university should be doing, but one which actually was strengthened by the voice, the aspirations, the anxieties of a whole host of different estates that were affected by our conduct. So I think there's a number of ways in which you can think creatively about how you do good governance and how you actually build legitimacy and confidence in the work we do. And I think fundamentally, it requires a spirit of openness, of transparency within the community to doing this work together. It's not that we'll always at the end of the day agree on every issue, but what's important is to try and as much as possible is to make these decisions in a manner that essentially puts everyone on equal footing and understanding what's at stake, what you're trying to do, and ultimately how you'll demonstrate accountability to actually follow through on the commitments you've made.
Ms. Jones.
Thank you. So to this question, my answer is yes and no. While, yes, it is a place for democracy to take place, especially when it's the students, the surrounding neighborhoods, people in and around the university. My hometown is not affected by, them directly. We're not traveling an hour to go to these universities to participate in the panels, the speeches, things that are going on there. So, but at a broader scale in Wisconsin, we do have a UW system, and I think across the state we look towards Madison as kind of that leading role in the system, and they're very closely tied with the legislator. And what's a really cool thing about Wisconsin is with our shared governance, we have a part in the legislation that says we have a voice in like how things are spended with our segregated fees. And so shared governance, and in my experience in student association, our voices are very much sought after and asked, and they're heard. However, there are maybe 10 senators and 4 exec members. So that's 14 people at Milwaukee out of 2,500 that are there helping make these decisions. And so I do believe shared governance is a really important thing that we should lean on, but how do we get students to also feel welcomed in those spaces? It's been a part of my mission of trying to get students just aware of what student association is. And this is the channels of how you can come to us, talk to us, we can connect and have meetings with administration. It's very rare that happens. And another thing, kind of talking about students, is they are the ones who come to these institutions, spend about 4 or 5 years learning on the institution. And for me, particularly, my experience in student association has given me an insight onto what's behind the curtain, if you will, and how that works, and what does it mean to truly participate, going beyond voting. And most of the time, sometimes students will go back to their hometowns and share those resources or stay in the city. They're mobile. Those are the people, that's the part of the university that's mobile and needs to be invested in. So yes.
Let me follow that up and actually continue the conversation with Ms. Jones about those people who are not yet part of, or maybe never will be part of the university, because they are part of our demos as well. I know that you coming from rural Wisconsin, there's a I'd say a decreased interest in ever being a student. That the idea that everyone aspires to go to college is certainly not present in the same way. And linked to that, I'd also ask President Daniels and Professor Baldwin after that, what are the differences between those, what it is that the institution is interested in, and those who aren't part of it, whether that's the neighborhood, whether that's the people who see it as an invasive force, or even those who see it as an aspirational one, that to be part of a university that's incredibly well regarded even internationally is to have a specific position in respect to those who are not part of and may never be part of a university. So first, Ms. Jones.
Right. So it's a little funny because when I grew up, my parents, they were very adamant that I go to college, me and both of my brothers. And in recent years, that attitude has shifted a little bit. And it's not just, from my family, but, we all kind of sense that there's this distrust, this questioning happening at our universities. And, it's hard to communicate with people that the deeper side of it, the well-rounded education, because the whole goal for me to go to college was so I can make a living, have a job that's more of an office job, coming from a union family. My dad never wanted us to work 12 hours a night every night. And so he worked hard to get us here. And it could be a little discouraging to find your footing in that. However, it's one of those things that I continue to help advocate for in my family. And just overall, I think the benefits of higher education are, outweigh any costs. Although in this economy, it's starting to teeter a little bit, of course, because the value of getting a degree, particularly in my profession of conservation, it's not like I'm, it's not a business degree or healthcare where it's very lucrative, but it goes deeper for that than me, and the community sense and public health too. It's more than just money. But of course, not everyone has that feeling. So it's hard to balance. But
Thank you. President Daniels.
So, what I thought I would turn to is this issue of how do you actually think about the interests of those people who are adjacent to the universities, and I guess this is something that implicates a lot of the work that Professor Baldwin has done on interrogating the role of universities in cities, and particularly of interest are cities like the one that I'm in that have suffered significant challenges in terms of deindustrialization and so forth, legacy of intergenerational racism and so forth, how you actually think about the potential for the university as a so-called anchor institution to play a role in helping the welfare of those communities. To my mind, and this is something that was really important for me when I came to Hopkins, was a recognition that one had to be very intentional in thinking about your responsibilities as a part of a broader community. That is to say that you just couldn't simply see, well, the university has an imperative to worry about its core academic mission. You think about students, you think about faculty, you think about patients in the case of the academic medical center, and worry about yourself and leave the city to others. For us as the largest private employer in the city and in the state, simply inconceivable that you could actually take such a myopic view of your role and responsibilities. And so, the first thing that was, I think, really important for us to do was to acknowledge that being in a city like Baltimore, and for Baltimore, at one time, it was a city of 1.2 million people at its peak, home of several major corporations. The decades have not been good to Baltimore in terms of deindustrialization. It's now a city that's approximately half the size of the city at its peak, and that has an impact on the amount of tax space available to support the education and health imperatives of the city, so on and so forth. So it's in that context that with a whole lot of challenges that are confronting the city, we've really sought to think about ways in which we can be a better, more responsible citizen. For lots of employees across the various Hopkins University health system, about 18,000 of whom live in the city of Baltimore. To do well for those people, to give them better opportunities for advancement, to give them educational opportunities for being able to achieve their personal best as employees within the Hopkins network. That's a good way, first and foremost, in which you can help the city, is to provide those kinds of opportunities, and being more thoughtful about how you can actually take seriously the interests, the needs of staff, is something that I think is a very important way in which you can be a responsible citizen. We often talk as universities about our responsibilities, our commitments to students and to faculty. I don't think we talk enough about staff. And I think, again, recognizing how important they are to the institution, but how important they are to the city, that's an important reorientation. I think it's really important to think about ways in which you can just be much more deliberate about how you do your work of being a university and thinking about the impact of the city around you. So for instance, thinking about the ways in which we hire people, the way in which we spend on purchasing products, the way in which we do construction projects. There are a whole host of things that we do that if you just start to turn the gaze towards the interests of the community, I think you can actually have a very significant effect on impacting in a positive way the life of people who surround us. So for instance, we've become really intentional about thinking about, first and foremost, knowing how much hiring we do each year, but hiring out of those neighborhoods in the city that are the most disadvantaged, to give entry-level jobs to people who are in those neighborhoods, and giving them priority over other neighborhoods, seeing that as a way in which we can be impactful. More than that, we've been really committed to seeing opportunities for citizens who have been incarcerated, returning citizens, to see the jobs that we can offer as pathways back into the workforce. And again, another way in which we can be responsible citizens, responsible residents in our community. And so, thinking about how we're more intentional about how we use our procurement spend, again, trying to favor Baltimore firms, woman and minority-owned firms, to giving them preference, again, as a way of doing the things we normally do, but having positive impact on our community. And then one can go on from there, the things that you can think about doing in the public school system, in healthcare, public health delivery, and so forth. But given that we've got this bounty of intellectual and other assets, I think it's really important that you see yourselves, as I hope we do, that you're not just, as I like to see, in or at, but truly of the city. And as such, really trying to think about the ways in which you can do the things you do, but do so in a manner that actually benefits those who surround us.
Professor Baldwin.
Thank you. In terms of the original question about like the utility of higher education, who feels it, who sees it, what's the suspicions around it, I think it's a really legitimate question in terms of more and more people are seeing less utility in higher education as a pathway to upper mobility, even though the numbers say otherwise. But there's a growing suspicion about the fact that you're going to get indoctrinated with whether it be right wing or left wing ideology, depending on who your perspective is, that's going to happen. It's not going to be a true education. There's more dictation around it being a pathway. Can you demonstrate a clear pathway for education, for career success? So a more entrepreneurial and a career-oriented pathway. So we're losing the idea of learning for learning's sake, or that the realization that if you talk to employers, they're going to tell you that they want people with liberal arts degrees and not pre-professional degrees to the same degree, because they can think nimbly and innovatively as compared to those who are just tracked into one area. So the reality is coming up against the perception about what universities and higher education do. I think part of the problem is in our own design in terms of higher education. I'll say us, meaning as a faculty member. Part of the problem is in our own design, in the sense that it's become less and less accessible. We're facing greater and greater costs. Students are facing greater debt. When you look at a school, a public or private school, again, as I said earlier, they only exist because of a state charter. Private schools will tell you that they are independent of that, but they're not. The state charter brings all schools into existence in your state. And the condition is that you serve the public good. And part of the presumption is that you will serve the citizens of your state. But what are we having? We have more and more schools that are trying, both public and private schools, that are attempting to get students out of state or internationally who will pay more in fees, in tuition, in amenities, and we are leaving the residents of our states behind. So I grew up in Beloit, Wisconsin. I'm from Wisconsin. I went to Marquette University. I spent time on the east side where the University of Milwaukee campus is. Over the years, we increasingly see less and less students from the state of Wisconsin attending those schools. More from either other parts of the states or internationally, and that's a financial, fiscal concern, which undermines the claims of higher education serving our democracy, the very thing they brought into existence to do. The question and the point that Bailey made earlier about being from a rural area, and so is a question about whether or not higher education really, her community is really touched by higher education. But whether you are attending a university, increasingly over time, there's a good chance that even if you aren't a student of university, you will be an employee of a university at a low wage. You will receive your health care from a university or its rural satellites. You will be policed by campus police, or you will be renting in a university property or living in a neighborhood where increasingly the properties are owned by university, which impacts your property taxes, especially if you're on a fixed income, and the cost of your rental costs because of what university expansion does to land values in your neighborhoods. So even if you are a direct student, there are all these other external, what we might consider external, which are central to higher education, ways in which you will be touched by the industry of higher education that we must grapple with. And this brings up the issue President Daniels mentioned of transparency. And so if we take these things into account, and let's just use Baltimore, for example. Just a couple of years ago, it was nurses, the nurses union, that discovered that while Johns Hopkins Medical Center is reputed to be the #1 medical facility in the world, that the conditions of everyday people of East Baltimore in terms of health conditions are at the worst. So we argue in my lab with the Social Mission Alliance, which has a chapter at Johns Hopkins, that we need greater transparency, that the rankings of medical facilities, university medical centers, and their tax exemption is predicated on offering indigent care to the residents that live in the host communities. But schools are allowed to self-report. So then what do you have? In the case of Johns Hopkins a couple of years ago, the nurses union found out that instead of offering the services that the school should offer for host communities in exchange for the university's tax exemption, schools were pursuing liens on residents' homes because they were residents of East Baltimore and also employees of the university. So they were pursuing liens on the homes of the people who were both employees of the university and receiving care, market rate care, that couldn't pay the market rates, right? That's the legacy that we're talking about. So if we're going to have transparency, we need to have transparency in these areas. I talk to East Baltimore residents all the time that work at the university. They love having employment there. They love being employed by Johns Hopkins University, but they also understand that because they're on a 9-month hiring cycle, they are put on furlough or delayed services in the summertime, or because they are discouraged from engaging in collective bargaining, that they can have a full-time job at Johns Hopkins and still be eligible for public assistance. This is the heart. These are the issues where democracy and university responsibility to democracy should be central in ways that have very little to do with what's happening in the classroom. These very same institutions like Johns Hopkins, they put together a tech and development project called Eager Park in East Baltimore. That research park wouldn't have been possible without the displacement of hundreds of Black residents that had lived there previously. The promise is that they would be able to return into housing that would be there. That has not happened to the same degree. There's not been the same amount of housing congruent with the number of people who were displaced. And more importantly, the conditions of returning and housing subsidies on the part of the university have been limited to those who are directly employed by the university. But the university is increasingly making employment predicated on subcontractors. So what does this mean? If you are a direct employee of Hopkins, you might be eligible for the housing assistance. But if you work for a subcontractor like Fox Securities in Baltimore, you are ineligible for the housing subsidies that were supposed to be promised to all residents that were displaced to make way for Eager Park. So in these areas of housing, of labor, of education access, democracy is not happening. And so these are things that have little to do with the classroom, but are central to the role of higher education in democratic possibility. We haven't even talked about policing yet, but we can.
That's a good invitation, and I think we can start this question off with President Daniels as a chance to respond. That we have these institutions that we may imagine in the popular opinion as ivory towers, but in fact they are intimately connected to, dependent upon, and potentially creative of the communities that they exist alongside and within. And I want to invite you to respond to Professor Baldwin here as well. But is it even possible to do the sorts of things that an embedded university promises to do, like keep students 100% safe, even if they are drinking occasionally at an illegal age, while not militarizing the space of the university against the community around them? Like, is that even a possibility? Or is it a tragic inability that we can never achieve?
Well, I'm not quite sure where to begin because there's so many different issues that have been raised. Why don't I go back to, and maybe we can think about these issues you raised in the last segment, just around student responsibility, policing, and so forth. Maybe we can deal with those separately. I think the question that Professor Baldwin is raising is one of how do you properly discharge your role to the community? How do you actually take those interests seriously? And without getting to a point-by-point refutation of a lot of the points that have been raised, as you can imagine, I will have a slightly different version or thoughts on some of the things you've said in terms of, again, in the context of a nursing, a group of nurses who are thinking about and seeking to organize things are often said in that context, which won't be surprising to say that those on the other end of these negotiations don't entirely agree with, and in terms of alleging modes of behavior that may in fact be different in fact from what they are. But I think that to my mind, and that Eager Park or the EBDI project that you referred to, I think is one that's worth spending just a few minutes on to clarify and to at least give a sense of what we're trying to do, or at least what what I inherited when I came here at Hopkins, and a number of things that you talked about in terms of displacement of people and the role that the university played and limiting return to the community and so forth are all related to this project, which I'll just take a few minutes to quickly detail. So this is an interesting case study. When I got to Hopkins, the university, largely driven by 3 levels of government, state, local, and federal, along with support from the Annie Casey Foundation, basically focused on about 88 acres of neighborhood that was closely adjacent to Johns Hopkins, which were really, really very challenged. This is in East Baltimore. It's called the East Baltimore Development Initiative. And essentially, when the project started, and the effort was essentially to say that these 88 acres are among the most challenged in terms of looking at standard indicia of human welfare, levels of employment, levels of life expectancy, levels of violence, just even vacancy levels. Only about 30% of the blocks that were encompassed in this area were actually occupied. The rest were vacant. So essentially multiple levels of government, ultimately was supported by Johns Hopkins, decided to essentially seek to redevelop these blocks, and with a view to creating a new school for K-8 students, public school, not a charter school, just open to neighborhood students, to create a new urban park, to create other amenities, but also to try and create sites for spin-off companies and so forth, in the effort that this goes to this idea of, in a city where there's rapid deindustrialization, could the university actually, through its activities, kick off new industries, new firms that might bring tax base and employment to the city and turn the tide on the massive population losses that the city had suffered. And so it's in that context that the university ultimately went along with this project and played a role in one, paying residents, or about 700 families, that ultimately were whose homes were purchased at very substantial premiums, in the order of about $150,000 for each family who owned homes. And the effort was to essentially rebuild those communities, build new housing, increase the density so that there be more boots on the ground to support the neighborhoods, and then build all these other amenities that I talked about a moment ago. You know, it was a really challenging task, but that ultimately one that's taken many years. There was significant community involvement. But it's true that only about 10% of the people who left the community ultimately decided to return to it. Now, whether or not they wanted to stay in the community, or whether they found that as they moved to new neighborhoods and were able to purchase homes there and ultimately got embedded in those communities, whether there was another way in which this project could have been done to have kept more of those people within the community, I think that's a fair discussion. And if there was another way to do this, but be that as it may, by the time I got to Hopkins, this was very much a fait accompli, that this was a plan that the designers of this project had taken. But fundamentally, the idea behind this was, how do we actually respond to the deindustrialization, the poverty, a lot of the social challenges that community faced, and how do you actually use the strength of the university, along with government and Annie Casey Foundation, to try and engage in a deep level of urban renewal and bring back a community that in some sense harkens back to where the community was at its peak many decades earlier. It's not easy, but I will say this, there's now a magnificent urban park in the center of the neighborhood. There was no green space before. There is new commercial and retail activity, not as much as we would like, but that has come in a way that there wasn't before. There's a school that we are the operator of. It's a public school, but is demonstrating remarkable performance improvements in the skills and capacities of students who are enrolled in that school. And I should finally say the residents who are there now, in terms of numbers, track where the community was at the start of this project. Still not as high as we'd like it to be. We're still waiting on more development, but it really reflects this effort to try and use the financial, the intellectual acumen of the university to make this neighborhood better. It's really something that was not meant to be a projection of imperial power, as much as it was really meant to be something that was designed to do something for the community that drew appropriately on the strengths and the capacities of the university. I'm sorry for being long-winded, but I thought it was important to detail the context for this.
Sure. I'd like to make sure to leave enough time for questions from the listeners, and I invite you, if you're on Facebook, to ask a question there, or if you're watching this on Zoom, to put a question in the chat. But I want to end my questioning with a kind of optimistic question for each of you, starting with Dr. Baldwin. I was really taken in a tremendously excoriating book that is not happy with the role that universities have played in a number of different ways in communities, that you end on what seems to be a very inspirational example, and that is of the University of Winnipeg under the leadership of Lloyd Axworthy, I believe, who really has seemed to transform the way in which the community and the university have a relationship. So I want to ask you, not just like, is that good, but also like, what do you recommend that people who do not see, who do not have a kind of singular figurehead doing that kind of transformation, like what other avenues are available for people to use universities to make their communities better?
Yeah, I love talking about solutions because I believe, I've been a professional academic for almost 30 years. I believe in the power of higher education, and my analysis, some people say, oh, you hate universities. My analysis comes from a deep, profound love for universities and higher education, and making sure it lives up to the mission that it claims. And so with that spirit in mind, as you mentioned, going beyond just simply what I saw at Winnipeg, but what we do at the lab more broadly, in working with communities that sit in the shadows of nonprofits, particularly higher education institutions. We do a number of things. So currently right now, I'm working with the coalition called For Us, By Us in Baltimore, that is attempting, while universities in Baltimore are resisting re-upping the pilot agreement, which is a payment in lieu of taxes agreement, that universities will offer compensation in lieu of their tax exemptions on the part of the state. While universities are currently resistant, I would love to have President Daniels sign on to agreeing to being a leader and saying that the 9 universities that came together a number of years ago to sign on to a pilot should revisit and re-sign that pilot. So For Us, By Us, led by
Professor Baldwin, seriously, the facts do matter. Our pilots.
Yeah, they do. Let me finish, because he asked me about solutions. So
all I just want to say is we're happy to,
solutions
we're committed to
we would
extending
love
the
to see a
pilot.
pilot come online all across the country, where it's universities offer a payment in lieu of taxes to compensate for their tax exemption that directly impacts things like public schools, road maintenance, fire and police. We would love for schools, both public and private, to have conditions upon which, if you're going to be put into existence by state charter, that you have a set aside number of slots in your admissions classes for students both from the state and from the city. that have a direct pipeline of accessibility for the higher education. We call on schools to have robust adult education programs to be either increased or revived. We call on schools to engage in compensation and reparations for their hand in slavery, for their hand in urban renewal in the 1950s and 60s, because the very neighborhoods like East Baltimore or West Philadelphia that are now sites of development parks like Eager Park or University City sit on neighborhoods that were displaced a number of years ago. So we call for repair. We call for community-based urban planning and zoning subcommittees within zoning boards, so that don't just have advisory roles, but have enforcement powers that require that any university-driven developments that take place in a city or a region be greenlit, evaluated by planning and zoning boards that focus on those things. We call on simple things. Every day, schools throw away tons of food to meet health code requirements. What would it mean if they took that food and packaged it into healthy meals for communities in need every day?
Thank you.
I've been bringing this up for decades. Schools have not taken me up on the call. These are just a couple of things. If you build a development, build out affordable housing in the area, not at 120 AMI, area median income, but at 40 to 60 AMI, which is the actual point at which residents live in the communities. So these are the things that could be done. These are simple things. These are things within the purview. Campus safety. We know that 9 out of 10 police calls do not require an armed response. And yet what are universities doing? They are ramping up armed police responses, not for safety, because we know that campuses are not safe. Campuses have high rates of sexual violence, substance abuse, petty crime. These police are for public optics. They're to make parents and investors feel safe. How does safety actually work? And the scholarship will tell you that as a university. Safety comes in the form of housing security, job security, food security. What institution is better equipped to engage in actual public safety? Universities. But what are they doing? They're ramping up armed security that don't actually enforce or increase safety. They simply respond to crime because for the public optics. These are solutions. These are things that are in fact based on research, conversation, and analytic study over 15 years of scholarship.
Thank you, Professor Baldwin. I want to ask a somewhat unrelated question to President Daniels, just in the same optimistic vein, about the way in which I think universities have a model of democratic deliberation that you mention in your book, but I think you don't talk much about the original and creative way that Johns Hopkins does it. I believe there's the Homewood Academic Council, where decisions have to be made and even administrative decisions have to be approved by the faculty, so that you get actual shared governance, shared decision-making, egalitarian relations between different parts of a university that I think most universities don't engage with, don't have to go through to get a kind of collective decision. Do you want to talk about that infrastructure of decision-making a little bit?
So, the issue around the Homewood Academic Council is it's a council that exists for 2 of our 9 schools. It's the council, it's the place where essentially tenure and promotion decisions, as well as other sort of issues going to program review and so forth, are made. Each of our that's one out of 8 different bodies that exist at the university. Most of the schools, virtually all of the other schools, have their own advisory bodies that actually, in the way which is not very unusual, make decisions for the schools that go to tenure, promotions, program review. And I think that's a standard and well-accepted part of the model of shared governance, that there's a voice for deans and for faculty in thinking about who is appropriate for promotion, who is not, where there are programs that graduate placements or time to degree completion of PhD programs is too long, and that they should be some kind of consequence for that. These are quintessentially decisions which both academic leaders and faculty work on together, and I think that's as it should be. Again, local decisions are really important here, where expertise resides, where you can expect, and that departments who have disciplinary expertise and who will understand what is good work, what is less good work, they're the ones who ultimately should make it. But in the university, we also understand that others are involved in that decision. And ultimately, in the case of Hopkins, what happens is that decisions that come out of those bodies ultimately go to a university council. We call it TAC, but that's essentially where faculty from across the university supervise those decisions and review them, ensure that university standards are being met. So it's faculty checking faculty with support of deans, provosts, and ultimately it's something I feel responsible for, president. But I think that's actually a really good, tried and true way in which we make sound decisions within the university.
Thank you. And my optimistic question for Ms. Jones actually starts our questions from the audience, because I know that some of the results she's found, and I think this is very optimistic. So somebody asks, wanting to know more about your study, talking with other students. What are you finding that students are feeling about the relationship between civic engagement and their studies in higher education?
Thank you. So I think in general, most of the students that I asked, their main way of participating in democracy is voting, which is very important. But some other students mentioned that they don't know what else is there outside of that. So it can be, it was pretty split of like, people felt confident, like, yes, I am an active member. Some felt that no, they're not, and some were unsure. And many of those people who said no or unsure, they brought up issues of discouragement. So many times it was that they didn't have time to be well informed, didn't have time to even go and vote, didn't know when all the elections were happening, and then also just a frustration in the way our system works, and the two-party system, the money that's involved in just campaigning. A lot of young people just don't feel like it's for them, and so they're relying on their vote to go out. And I think too, with just the younger generation, we grew up with the internet, so we're prone and we want quick results that are visible. And with democracy, it takes a long time. And the university can play a role in educating students on what that is, what it looks like. And even some students brought up, like, because I asked, what would that look like if the system was to encourage that kind of education? And many said classes. We want, a mandatory class or something that would go towards our general education requirements. And most of the time there's trust in the university and distrust in what's beyond that. So kind of merging that together to say, it does take time and it works, and it's, have trust in it. It can be hard, but that's where students are in the universities that they trust. So hearing it from them would be valuable. And more things were just more activities on campus, like panels like these, speeches. And I think for me personally, it's conversations outside of these as well, and saving time in these panels for more broad discussions. And it's, something that I think many people can benefit from. But again, it's particularly for young folks, is how do we get started in that? Where's the push for it? Because I do think the K through 12 education is just not enough for that. And we're expected to kind of go out there on our own and figure it out. And particularly these young, me and other students, we have, varying mental healths and, stresses and things like that, where this isn't a priority. Participating in democracy isn't a priority for us right now. And it usually takes time to get there. But as we know, year by year, it's very important. Day by day, any kind of progress and working towards it is important. But how do we even know where those spaces are? Our Senate meetings for student government is 5 p.m. on a Sunday. That in itself isn't accessible, but moving it to sometime in the week has proven to be very challenging. And it's something that I think we could use some help from, larger departments in trying to solve. Our professional staff does an amazing job at trying to advocate for that. But again, they're 3-4 people out of the entire university. And, this is a big burden, and the, salaries that they make compared to me, I don't make anything. All of this is volunteer time for me. And the commitment, the time that I have put into just trying to understand who to talk to and what their role is and the authority they have and what they can help me with and the issues that I hear from students has taken me probably up until this time. I'm still learning things, and I will not fully be able to, I don't think I'll leave the university understanding all of it, but I do have a good grasp on how to figure it out. But that's through my own experience, not just in student government, but the classes that I choose to take extracurricularly, extra cost to me, which isn't something every student can do. Most of them, cost is a huge factor in going to school. I had a friend who got his degree in 3 years because the sooner the better, and he regrets not being able to be a part of these conversations and these opportunities. So, how can we balance that out for every student? And even the students and young people and public that don't go to higher education. It should be something that is given to us outside of paying, $5,000 for 3 months, and, that's just my perspective. And from the surveys I've gotten, it echoes that.
There's a follow-up question there, which draws both on President Daniels' outreach and working with students to direct the university, and Professor Baldwin's reference to the history of student activists creating and demanding new areas of study and new forms of analysis. Somebody asked, what role do you see students having in holding the university accountable for their actions? How do students feel about the role they should play in shaping the behavior and curricula of the university? That's still to you, Ms. Jones.
Oh, sorry. So that is a really great question. So on our campus, most recently, there's been more protests, particularly when it comes to Palestine and Israel. And I had the chance to speak to some of these students in person and listen to their frustrations and, the decisions of why they chose to go this way. And they just want to talk to somebody, have their voices heard. And it's, for me, in my own experience as someone in student government, I believe that they coming to student government would be the best way to handle that. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, it's not always accessible to every student, and trying to come up with ways that it is. But again, I think a lot of students, they're in their own organizations, they're part of their own missions working towards something, which is great because it's outside of student association, which has its own limitations. We can't necessarily, we're under viewpoint neutrality, so we can't necessarily, pick and choose things. We have to pick and choose everything, and so, these students, they have a particular mission, a specific message that they're trying to get out. and they're frustrated because they don't know where to go. They don't know who to talk to. And so they do these sit-ins in the chancellor's office, and they were able to get a meeting with them. But again, the chancellor is not our end all be all. We have so many moving parts in the entire institution that even go beyond our own campus into the state at the UW system level. And so it's one of those things that I see as a frustration and sympathize with, because that's what fueled me to get involved in student association in the first place. As a transfer student, I had no idea what was going on at our campus. There's no, at the time, not a very well organized orientation for transfer students. And so I was kind of thrown into the deep end, and paying for all these resources and things that I didn't know how to access. And it's a difficult thing, because not only are, I think so many places and sectors of our university are limited. And when I talk to the folks at new student orientation, I've only met 2, and they're, coordinating these big events for our students, and we get 5,000 new incoming students every year. And it's focused more in the dorms and keeping those folks safe. And it could echo kind of the investment that those students bring to our campus, and paying for dorms and housing and food that the transfer commuter students don't pay. However, I don't believe that our university doesn't care about those students. I think they care a great deal about those students, but it's more on the students to figure it out, unfortunately.
Thank you. I've got one more quick question in the last couple of minutes, and I'll aim this both at Professor Baldwin and President Daniels. Somebody asked, do public institutions like UWM have a different responsibility to democracy than private institutions? The historic disinvestment in public higher education in Wisconsin would suggest that they either do not see this responsibility or expect it as an unfunded mandate. How would you respond, Dr. Baldwin?
Thank you for that question. We currently understand that historically there has been a distinction between public universities and private universities, to the degree that approximately 70% of the operating budget of a public university was coming from the state level. In the current political and economic climate, most even flagship public universities only receive about 10 to 12% of their annual operating budget from the state legislature. So we're finding an increasing convergence between, if you just look at it from a financial standpoint, the public and private university. But I've been trying to highlight all day is that even when there was more money coming, public money supporting public universities, there are all these other ways in which the public trust and public oversight shape both public and private universities. Whether we're talking about the state charter that brings all institutions into existence, if we're talking about the federal dollars, the grants that underwrite research and development in our laboratories, and in the kinds of research and development that goes out to market and comes back to the university in the form of royalties or to pay for graduate students. If we talk about the tax exemption on property that all universities receive in exchange for providing an educational service, there are all these ways in which both public and private universities should have a public responsibility that requires a greater level of oversight. So, for example, right now with the Social Mission Alliance, which is a coalition of medical professionals and educators, we are trying to get all universities, medical centers, to sign on to an agreement that they will make more transparent their medical services that they are required to offer to host communities in exchange for their tax exemption. It's been a hard struggle, but we would love for leaders, at major flagship, both public and private universities, to say that they will make transparent what services they would provide. That's just one example. But in the bigger scheme of things, I think that all universities do have a responsibility to the public good because of what the public provides them for their very existence, including, as Ms. Jones talked about, political education. I teach a higher education course, and students that come through the course realize they're like, wow, I haven't just learned about higher education. I've learned how democracy works, because universities play such a central role in dictating resource allocation, resource distribution, political governance in everyday life. That through the lens of higher education, I've learned how democracy works. And so I think it would be great if we made it available at a greater scale.
I hate to cut you off, but
Yeah, sure.
we still have only about a minute
Yeah.
For President Daniels as a president of a private education writing a book about our public. What is your answer to that question?
So I think very simply, the differences between public and private universities, I think, are really diminishing. I think in the ways that we've been discussing, that we have a significant, whether you're talking about public or private universities, have a significant impact on the public weal. I think in all the ways that we've talked about in terms of education of students, the character of our research, the nature of our employment, the effect on communities around us, the kind of care we provide within and outside of our communities. In all these ways, we are a very public regarding institution. And I think then the challenge is to make sure that you actually put in place a set of mechanisms that that will allow the university to discharge its role, but in a manner that has fidelity to those interests, at the same time that you are able to conduct the missions that are distinctive to each and every institution that comprise this amazing constellation of institutions of higher learning in the United States.
Thank you. On that point of convergence, I'd like to thank all of our participants and turn the conclusion back over to Emilio Dottore.
Thank you so much, friends. That was thought-provoking. I think it was a very important discussion that covered a lot of ground and topics. There were great questions. There was great conversation. There was great passion, and I hope everyone gets a chance to hear this in the future as it has been recorded, and we will archive this and share it. Before we leave, we have a couple of quick announcements. Tomorrow, March 29th, for those of you in Milwaukee, our friends at Metcalf Park Community Bridges will have a community archives event to capture the essential and often overlooked stories that comprise this beautiful community. Join their team and 1960s civil rights activists like Fred Reed and others to support them and add your voice to the only community-owned archive that I'm aware of in Milwaukee. March 30th, join us at Your Move Milwaukee, 1107 West Historic Mitchell Street for the Knights and Kings event, where we will fit attendees with free dress shirts and ties. There are other clothing options, chess, DJs, food and fun. There is more information about both of these events on our website and social media. Please join all of us again on April 4th for another great Vel Phillips Forum with UWM's Center for 21st Century Studies and the Milwaukee Turners. This live at 1:30 p.m. at Curtin Hall, room 175, or virtually if you'd like. That topic is scaling trust and the emotions of voting, how emotions are being triggered and used to motivate civic engagement. Also, we will explore best practices to cool emotionally charged environments. There's more info online. And finally, April 24th is the Milwaukee Turners annual meeting right here at Turner Hall from 5 to 8 p.m. Come see old friends, elect new board members, and dance to the sounds of DJ Foxglove and DJ TOB. Make sure you renew your Milwaukee Turner membership on our website so that you can vote and attend. Once again, I'd like to thank our guests, our production team, especially Chrissy Fung and the team from UWM, and of course, you wonderful people who supported this forum and participated in the forum, specifically our partners at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Center for 21st Century Studies. Today's nonpartisan virtual forum has been sponsored in part by the Milwaukee County Office of Equity, MICA, NLG Milwaukee, and the Hertzfeld Foundation. If you're interested in supporting the Milwaukee Turners and our work, or becoming a sponsor for forums like this, visit us on Facebook or our website, milwaukeeturners.org. Until next time, please take care of one another.